Hey, Jeff. Oh, you're on mute.
Got it. I'm not on mute anymore. I think after 3 years, we'd all get used to that.
Oh, no, I still do it. Mark, do you want to give me user access? Oh, I think you just did. Yep.
Mark, are you just virtually running from meeting to meeting today?
I am. How about you?
It's just on one with Jacob.
Jason, I wasn't quite sure who needs to do presentations, so maybe I'll just make folks co-host as we introduce them. I didn't hear back from Paul Van Ryzen if he's doing a PowerPoint.
I don't have any slides. Mine is just presentation, and I'm going to put some links in the chat. So that's all I've got.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm not going to do slides.
Shelley's way more organized than I am usually.
No, I'm not going to do slides. I decided since it seemed like it was a hassle and people are just going to speak and it's only 10 minutes, I would just kind of speak to project types that we're looking at and costs and where I'm getting match is just ideas.
Okay. And Cynthia and Kristen will have them though.
And hey, Mark, this is Paul. I apologize. I thought I got back to you, but I do have a few slides to go over.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, now I'm feeling like I should have done slides. I'm feeling a lot of pressure, guys.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay. You should be a co-host now, Paul.
Whatever you need.
All right. You think we should go ahead and get started, Jason?
Absolutely.
Wait a few more minutes.
Cynthia, Jessica, and I were just on a call that just ended. So if Cynthia and Jessica haven't logged on yet, they will be shortly.
Yeah, we can wait a few more minutes.
Honor of Father's Day. Anyone have a good dad animal joke while we're waiting?
I don't.
Why did no one want to hang out with the grumpy whale? I'll do one. Because he was such a blowhard. We lose anyone with that one? Jen, really? Jen, do you play any card games?
No,
You know
I'm
what?
only saying that because I'm afraid of being the brunt of a joke.
So again, another animal one. You know you should never play cards with a cheetah, right?
Why?
Oh, with a cheetah? Cheetah?
Ah.
I'm not lying.
All right, you win the prize for the day, Jason.
I'm trying here. Oh, getting. All right, Mark, you think you want to go ahead and get it going? I think I've I've warmed up the crowd sufficiently.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, Jason. And it's so hard to have multiple windows on a little laptop screen, but welcome. I just want to say thanks to everyone for making time to participate in these this SWAPs learning series and the others. You know, this is intended to help all of you in this really overwhelming task of revising your state wildlife action plan. So please let Jason or I know if anything we can do to make these sessions even more productive for you. Looks like we got a really good turnout today. So I'm going to ask Jason to walk through the agenda quickly, and then I'm going to kind of get things started with a little bit about what's in RAWA that you may want to know about.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. So today is a little different than what we've done in the past, where we've had speakers and then we've had the breakout sessions to talk about different ideas and compare notes. Today, instead, we're going to have more of a panel discussion. So, you know, as you go through, if you have any questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll come back to you towards the end. But we're going to kick things off with Mark first, as he mentioned, talking about what you should know about RAWA when it comes to revising your SWAP. We're going to hear from Paul Van Ryzen from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the service's perspective on making SWAPs RAWA-ready. And then we've got a couple of examples from the states. So Jeff Trollinger from the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources will be highlighting how he's integrating the Virginia State Wildlife Viewing Plan and Wildlife Corridor Plan SWAPs. Shelley Plant from Texas Parks and Wildlife will be talking about examples of RAWA-ready conservation, education, and outdoor recreation projects in Texas. Cynthia Osmondson and Kristen Hall will be coming in with how Minnesota incorporates engagement and wildlife viewing into the current and upcoming SWAPs. And then Jen Newmark and Jess Brooks from Nevada are going to be talking about how they incorporated conservation, education, and wildlife recreation into their revised SWAPs. So a pretty full house today, but looking forward to the discussion. And I think, Mark, I'll turn over to you. We are taking notes. The session's being recorded, bad jokes and all. I'm so sorry. And again, if you do have questions, put them into the chat. I will note I have to sign off at 3 o'clock, but Mark will be around, and I'm hoping someone else from Fish is going to be able to cover for me. So thanks again. Let's go ahead and get it going.
Thanks for that, Jason. And so I'm just going to walk through, and I know some of you have heard this many, many times, but just to make sure we're sort of on the same page, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, that's sort of the coup de grace of funding that we know all of you need to do your work to conserve biodiversity across the nation. It has been almost a 50-year effort to secure these dedicated, sustained funds that RAWA would provide to all of you, replacing the state and tribal wildlife grants program. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act has a very specific purpose. It's to provide funding to states and tribes to help prevent species from being listed as endangered species, but also helping to recover those species that are already listed. So your SGCN lists probably cover most of the species that are already listed, federally listed, and state listed, but also those species that are known to be declining or are rare that we need to have better information to make those determinations of whether something is imperiled or not. And the program will, I think the current version of the bill there would be some ramp up. So we would eventually get to $1.3 billion split amongst the 50 states and territories. I know Paul's shop, Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration, they've provided sort of estimated apportionment tables that we've sent out in the past, but would be roughly a 20 or 22-fold increase in funding from what your state currently receives from the State and Tribal Wildlife Grant Program. So a huge increase in funding. So when you think about your state wildlife action plan, the purpose of those plans remain the same. The 8 required elements are the same that you currently adhere to. When you're doing this next revision, there might be a few things that you might that you might want to consider as you revise this plan. There's nothing in the legislation that specifically changes anything that you do for your state wildlife action plan, but some of the funding available for education and recreation and plants, potential funding might be something you would want to consider in your plan. But again, there's no new requirements under the current version of Recovering America's Wildlife Act for your plan. So Paul, I know I think is going to touch on plants a little bit. There is an incentive if you include plants in your state wildlife action plan that you can access some additional dollars. I think our hope is that over time, all states and territories would include plants in their plan because they are really representative of the biodiversity in your states. Excuse me. But there is no requirement that you put plants in your plan. And, if RAWA does not pass in the next year or two and you have a revised plan, it's okay for you to have plants in your plan, even if you can't necessarily spend state and tribal wildlife grants dollars on plants directly. You can certainly do plant conservation if it's part of a habitat that's associated with species of greatest conservation needs. So just to sort of clear up one misconception, many states already include plants in their plans, even though you're not able to technically directly spend state and tribal wildlife grant dollars on plants. So we're going to hear from some of your colleagues on education and recreation, conservation, education, and recreation. So there is funding that would be specifically available to states for conservation and education and wildlife dependent recreation. There is a cap on how much of your apportionment you could use for those purposes, but there is no requirement to include the actions that you would implement with Recovering America's Wildlife Act under conservation, education, or wildlife dependent recreation. But you're free to include planning or actions that you would take in your plan. So there's no prohibition, just like there is currently with plants. There's no prohibition with including education and wildlife dependent recreation in your state wildlife action plan. But it's totally your choice if that's something you would want to do. And there are a number of examples where states want to hear from some of your colleagues today on how they approached including those two topics in state wildlife action plans. It certainly, there are ties, certainly conservation education to species of greatest need conservation. And there's certainly can be ties between, increasing awareness and interest and support for species of greatest conservation need by providing people with greater access to viewing species of greatest conservation need. Now, one of the things that I think there's been a little bit of confusion about, but I think, from our perspective in terms of both the intent of Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and I think what the requirements would be, is that if you do conservation education work that's funded through Recovering America's Wildlife Act, there has to be a tie to SGCN. Just like with wildlife dependent recreation, there would need to be a tie. So if you wanted to put up public deer stands for people to view and or hunt deer, but deer are not part of your species of greatest conservation need list, you probably wouldn't be able to do that. If you put up a viewing blind in a marsh where you're encouraging people to view shorebirds that are SGCN, but that blind is also used for hunting during part of the season, I think in that case, you would be okay. Of course, you'd always want to consult with your wildlife and sport fish restoration representative in your region, just to make sure. But that's sort of the intent, is that there can be these dual purposes, but everything that you spend those dollars on have to in some way have some nexus or tied to species of greatest conservation need. And then I wanted to just touch upon match. So unlike state and tribal wildlife grants, federal dollars can be used as match. Certain federal dollars can be used for match under the current version of Recovering America's Wildlife Act. So any federal dollars that aren't USDA or Department of Interior can be used. That includes Department of Defense, EPA, NOAA. So you might want to be thinking about, as you develop your plan, to reach out and involve some of these federal agencies in the planning process, but also be thinking about how you might collaborate with somebody from maybe National Marine Fisheries Service. This is on marine mammals, or Department of Defense on sentinel landscapes, because you do have, there will be ties, just like state and tribal wildlife grants. The expenditure of the dollars will need to be tied to the plan. So, the specificity that you have in your plan sort of varies, but if you want to have those opportunities to partner with these other federal agencies, it might be useful to have conversations with those federal agencies, and maybe even include elements in your plan that are tied to some of the priorities of these federal agencies. And then lastly, I suspect there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on state and tribal wildlife plans if we go from a $74 million program to a $1.3 billion program. So, we want to make sure that the work that you do is accountable, and there's going to be more accountability built into these funds than there are with state and tribal wildlife grants. So, as you develop your plans, be thinking about how you can ensure accountability for the work that you describe in the plans. And think big. I mean, what you can do with, if you're a minimum state with $500,000 or $600,000 to what you can maybe do with millions of dollars, the scale might really change. And I think you'd be wise to build your next plan with the anticipation that there's going to be larger funding or larger funding available for implementing these plans in the future. We're really optimistic that we're going to be able to get Recovering America's Wildlife Act across the finish line this Congress. But if we aren't, the efforts will continue, and we're going to eventually get this. The need is not being questioned. It's more about how you pay for it and the amount of funding, but there's nobody questioning that we need to do more to conserve biodiversity, and the state fish and wildlife agencies and tribes are the place to make those investments. So I'm going to stop there. That's just sort of an overview. I think Paul is going to hit some of these finer points of RAWA, and I'll be here the entire time to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. All right, can folks see that? I'm trying to present mode. Does that work for everyone?
Yep. Good.
Okay, great. So I was asked to mainly focus on plants and RAWA, but I did want to follow up quickly to some of the remarks that Mark just made. I think everything he said was absolutely correct about, in particular, recreation and education, and I know other folks are going to speak in more depth about that. But I wanted to let you all know that last year we did address recreation and education in our interim guidance. I believe a number of state folks, I'm not sure if you're on the call right now, but a number of you were involved in reviewing some of that guidance. I was advised not to share that yet, and I think the main reason would be that we're not certain when RAWA may pass, and if, of course, there could be some changes in the final enacted law. So I was asked not to share that yet, but overall, the upshot of our analysis, and that included a couple of talks with our solicitor, was that education and recreation is going to be limited, similar to what Mark said, to consistency with the statement of purpose. And after my talk, I'm going to pop the 2023 Senate bill language into the chat, and that you'll see it right on the page number 2. The first 10 lines or so on page 2 describe what that statement of purpose is. In summary, it is avoiding the need to list species and also recovering currently listed threatened or endangered species under the ESA or under state law. So we did flesh that out quite a bit in our interim guidance. Come time that we can say that passage is imminent, it's likely we're going to be sharing that. And, probably as draft guidance, we're also going to be collecting, more input and more comments from anyone that cares to provide them. Yeah, and we'll work to refine that language and that guidance over time. And that is interim because eventually we'll be writing a rule, code of federal regulation for RAWA eventually, but that's a ways down the road yet. So I have 10 minutes. I've already used a couple, so I'm going to kick off really quickly. Sorry, I'm already getting ahead of myself. So just as background, and this is really quick, we all know that the Senate bill language includes a plant supplement. It doesn't exactly say that, plant supplement, but that is our term, and that's what we've used in our guidance and our preliminary apportionment that, as Mark mentioned, we released last year. That's calculated at 5% of each state's base apportionment. That is the first calculation based on the formula in RAWA. And looking at the full funding level in 2027, which is based on, again, the 2023 Senate bill language, that $1.3 billion will mean that funding of around 188,000 up to 2.8 million is going to be available as part of the plant supplement for each of those states. That's assuming that all states are adding plant SGCN by that time, and there is no remainder to divide up among other states. So I will, again, I'll share the bill language, and you may want to jot down, or I can just add it to the chat, that that's on page 14. This is the bill language pertaining to the plant supplement. It's really only a few lines. It's all on page 14, and it's lines 11 through 23. I'll add that to the chat after my talk. But that language has not changed from last year's bills. And so what we did last year was prepare some advisory guidance that I'll talk about briefly in a little bit. First, there's a couple notes and caveats I want to cover. The bill language does not require a state or a territory to use the plant supplement for plant SGCN conservation. We certainly hope that states and territories will. But as we understand and read the language now, there is not a requirement for that. So that's just something we feel is important to point out to folks when we're talking about this. This second bullet is obvious. Of course, the Senate bill language could change. And Mark already mentioned this third bullet. In the interim, states can may use SWIG program funds only for plant conservation if it's part of an action to conserve habitat for an animal SGCN. So I don't think there'll be any questions around that. I'm just going to move along here. So here's the 2017 guidance. This is important when you're considering a minor revision to add plant SGCN. I'm only talking about minor revisions today, not major revisions or comprehensive reviews. They just don't apply to everything I have to say here today. But for minor revisions, the easiest and fastest way to add your plant SGCN to your plan requires compliance with both the 2017 guidance and also our 2022 policy advisory. And both of those are available at that link. I'll include that link in the chat with all the other material that I'll share with you just as soon as I'm done. So what are the 2017 guidance requirements? And again, the 2017 guidance was negotiated. Probably a number of you on the call today were on the team that made the revisions. One of the main revisions to the guidance was that we reduced the burden on both you all in the States and also us in WISFR on processing minor revisions. So we really streamlined that process. In the 2017 guidance, the language says, and this is in section 5.3, if I'm not mistaken, that the minor revision has to comply with or be consistent with the same methods, criteria, or processes that you use to add or select your animal SGCN. So there can't be much divergence there. There may be a little bit of room for negotiation when you just don't have the same level of information that you do for your animal SGCN. And secondly, element 1, which is attached toward the back of the 2017 guidance, you do have to meet that definition, at least in some sense. That means including the low and declining plant populations. It's really up to you what is indicative of your state's plant diversity and health. But also, and this is what has tripped up a couple of states in the past year or so, some basic distribution and abundance information as available for your plants has to be included in that minor revision to add plant SGCN. So here are the two major criteria, I guess you'd call them, and these appear in our 2022 policy advisory. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. Your plan must include plant SGCN. Again, following the 2017 guidance is going to be to your advantage there, making sure you address especially that distribution and abundance requirement in the definition of element 1. And the second point here, and this is what I'll spend most of the rest of my time talking about. I know I only have about 4 minutes left. But including SGCN plants in conservation planning and habitat prioritization efforts. So how do we interpret that? That's rather vague language. Our policy advisory is taking the route of being as flexible and accommodating and liberal as possible with that language. So what we have in the guidance is that, you have to include information for at least some portion of your identified plant SGCN. And that is information on any of the elements 2 through 5. It doesn't have to be more than just one element. You certainly could add information on more than one element, but at a bare minimum, at least some subset of your plant SGCN need to have additional information that is linked to elements 2 through 5. Just as an example, some states were pursuing habitats to qualify under that second criterion. And it was as simple as linking the subset of SGCN they had selected of plant SGCN to their key habitats. So this is not a difficult process. Again, we really took the approach of let's make this easy and inexpensive as possible. It could be as simple as selecting plant SGCN and then taking a subset of those and linking them to your key habitats that are in your existing plan. So what is the process then? Again, this goes back to the 2017 guidance, and section 5.3 is where you want to look. The first step is notifying your WISFR regional office. Part of that notification should include defining what changes you plan to make, just describing your SGCN plants that you'll be adding. We need a justification, some justification to show that your selection process is consistent with the methods, criteria, or processes in your existing plan. We do stress that we need something more than just you telling us that they are consistent. We would appreciate some links to your existing plan so we can go back and verify and make sure that your process is actually consistent, and that's going to be a big part of moving your request along expeditiously. So we would like you to provide an expected time frame. Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months before you can complete this? And then it's important that you request a provisional determination. And a provisional determination is going to be basically saying in the WISFR regional office response, that last bullet, that we provisionally determine that you're eligible for the plant supplement. But the caveats will be attached to that. As long as RAWA has not yet passed, and until we know that that language in the 23 Senate bill has not changed, we're only going to be able to say that if this language does not change and RAWA has passed, then yes, you will be eligible. So there is a chance, of course, that it doesn't, and I'll address that in a little bit. If that language does change, I think my next slide will address that. So the process overview continued here. Once you receive that notification back, that acknowledgement from your Worcester region, then you submit all of your materials as soon as you're done to the Worcester Regional Office. And by the way, this can all be done by email directly to your point of contact, which is typically going to be your State Wildlife Grant Program Coordinator. It does not have to go to a regional director. None of that. It's quick and easy as an email to your point of contact managing SWIG in the region. Submit all that revision material. Worcester, the regional office will acknowledge receipt, or in some cases, we have requested additional information, but typically that request has been very minimal. There's just been a couple of tweaks in the 4 or 5 minor revisions that we've processed so far to add plant SGCN. So it's I don't want to discourage you there. It's really just maybe another hour or two of work to make sure that we are complying with the RAWA language as we interpret it. And then there is a timeline in the advisory guidance that does not apply anymore, because that applied to the 2022 RAWA bills and the timing that we are anticipating there. But the bottom line is you need to receive that provisional determination at least 3 weeks prior to our final RAWA apportionment. That's several months off. So there are, lots of months between now and then, and we'd love to get started with you. So finally, here's where I mentioned that if that plan supplement does change, we are going to have to reissue that policy advisory from headquarters, interpreting any language changes. We actually don't think that's going to happen, especially since the language is exactly the same in 2023 as it was in 2022. But if there is a change, those states that qualified under the 23 language as it is now, if that language changes, we may have to call and talk to you about some additional required information. But again, we don't anticipate that. That's probably not going to happen. I'm just telling you how that will work if there is changes in that language. We will reach out to you and work with you on collecting that information that we need. And then in terms of best practices, if you are anticipating a minor revision to add plant SGCN, please reach out to your Worcester Regional Office point of contact. That's typically going to be your SWIG manager as early as possible. They may ask for me to be involved, and we can have a 3-way conversation. Sometimes they want to handle it themselves. We're as flexible as possible, but sometimes an initial consultation is a good idea just to make sure expectations are straight and we're all on the same page. And again, I mentioned this earlier, we need sufficient justification, especially for why your minor revision is consistent with the methods in your approved plan. So put a little effort into that. I'm not talking about a dissertation, but a paragraph or so is typically what we've accepted in the past. And then we encourage you, this is not a requirement, finally, we encourage you to publish that new plant SGCN information on your website, just so the public has it as soon as possible. But we are recommending, if you don't have the time and resources to actually revise your full document, just put it in an appendix and post the appendix. And I think that's all I had. And I guess we're going to take questions later on, Mark. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity.
Next up, we're going to go to Jeff Trollinger. Thank you so much, Paul.
All right, well, I'm Jeff Trollinger with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. And for us, the major crux, we're a little unique in the fact that we have a state wildlife viewing plan and a state wildlife action corridor, state wildlife corridor action plan that we have put together between us and our partners. And so we are using both of those as guidance documents. In our original Wildlife Action Plan, or in 2005, we actually had an entire appendix on conservation education and outreach efforts. We were one of 4 or 5 states at that time that had a watchable wildlife program with staff. And so we took that opportunity to integrate our watchable wildlife staff into our original Wildlife Action Plan. When we did the 2015 revision, we did not put as much emphasis on that. We were a little short-staffed, and so our action plan coordinator at the time was kind of down and dirty with it, and we did what we had to do to get our action plan revision done. If anybody would like to see the 7 pages that we put in our original plan, I'll be more than glad to send those to you. I don't have them on our website anymore. As it relates to where we're going forward, our wildlife action, or our wildlife viewing plan, has several goals in it. The first goal in our wildlife viewing plan is to connect diverse segments of the public to wildlife and wildlife viewing. And the objectives under that goal deal with increasing participation by underrepresented groups, increasing engagement of urban populations, increasing awareness of wildlife and opportunities for participating in wildlife viewing with youth and families. And so all of those deal specifically with and mention specifically talking about SGCN species. So they tie, the 2 plans tie very well together in terms of the way we've done this. And I suppose it helps that I've been on all of the different planning groups for all of these plans. So it's nice to have somebody that cuts across all the grains to make sure that they're consistent with each other. In addition to that first goal, the third goal in our wildlife viewing plan talks about promoting wildlife and habitat conservation through wildlife viewing. And this deals specifically with volunteer engagement, so citizen science projects, fostering a culture of responsible wildlife viewing. And then the final goal talks a little bit about building broader constituencies for wildlife conservation through wildlife viewing, which also deals a little bit with building financial support for a lot of these. Yes, and Eileen, I will post all the links to these as soon as I get done. Much like Paul said, I'll put all the links up as soon as I get done. But I just wanted to make sure that, like I said, for our wildlife viewing plan, there are several goals in the wildlife viewing plan that tie specifically back to dealing with conservation education and dealing with conservation education specifically as it relates to SGCN species. So our 2 plans in those regards tie very well together to make sure that we can provide that direct connection for conservation education and our watchable wildlife program back to the Wildlife Action Plan. And so we've made a real objective stress for that. The last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is our Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. And the other piece of this is that while the Corridor Action Plan is not specifically dealing with conservation education, there is a lot of conservation messaging that goes along with the Corridor Action Plan. So for instance, there are dealing with informing people about wildlife habitat corridors and expanding those corridors so that we can deal with them in terms of a transportation issue. Our Virginia Department of Transportation was part of the group that helped put our Corridor Action Plan together. We were the lead agency, but we worked with several other agencies to get this done. And then we also have an intent in the Corridor Action Plan for looking at how do we inform the public about where these places are and why the needs for them are, and some of the money that is going to be required to provide for crossings and safe crossings for wildlife and to decrease traffic accidents in a lot of these areas. And one of the things that specifically talks about in our Wildlife Corridor Action Plan is looking at places where we need to do conservation for species of greatest conservation need in these corridors so that we can decrease impacts on these resources. We know that we have several places where we have specific SGCN species that are crossing highways and that we are noting mortality in these species. So that certainly speaks directly to the Wildlife Action Plan in terms of how do we address those takes, those mortalities as part of the conservation messaging and in terms of what we are going to do in terms of conservation actions as part of the Corridor Action Plan. So that is how we are moving forward. We have a group. I have already started meeting with our watchable wildlife program and our conservation education staff here at the department. They are all helping us write those portions of our wildlife action plan as we work into the revisions. And so that is basically what I had, and I will be more than glad to stick around for questions as we get to that. And I will also paste these links into the chat so that everyone will know where they can find these. And there you go. And I will turn it over to Shelley.
Actually, I think Cynthia and Kristen, you're up. Oh, I'm sorry, Shelley, I apologize.
It doesn't matter if y'all want to do all the plans first and then end with me, whichever direction you want to go.
No, I apologize, Shelley. I'm not reading my own agenda.
Okay. So I'm Shelley Plant. I'm the Nature Tourism Manager at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And I work with Kelly, who's on the call. And I am more coming at this as someone who works in wildlife viewing and also is in the conservation education program at our agency. So Texas, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, when we first were thinking RAWA would pass, put together a cross-divisional program to discuss projects that could be funded, projects that are shovel ready, existing successful programs that could scale up should funding become available, to really think about how would we use these funds for outdoor recreation and conservation education to meet the needs of the SWAP and the people of Texas. And so when I've talked to my colleagues in other states, they either haven't been at the table or haven't been having those kinds of discussions. So we thought it would be helpful if I discussed some of the projects that we came up with in our state that we would be looking towards funding, and how we're looking at maybe funding match for that, just to kind of get the the gears turning and thinking about what could happen in your own state in this space. I mean, it's only up to 15% of those funds if the bill language stays constant. So it's not a huge portion of the funds, but it is a huge portion for severely underfunded programs in your states and could be transformational. So we do have some existing programs. I am a wildlife viewing staff of one for the entire state of Texas. So I have that going for me. One of the projects that I was looking at is we have a Great Texas Wildlife Trail. It's a birding and wildlife viewing trail in the state of Texas. It is unstaffed. It's one of my programs that I run, but it could do a lot more if we could increase staff and have at least one coordinator on that program, connecting people to wildlife viewing opportunities that definitely include species greatest conservation need. Tied with that program, I have a volunteer project with our master naturalist that has thousands of hours worth of work each year that can be potentially used as match, depending on how we work with master naturalists and how we count those hours. And they are doing iNaturalist lists and eBird lists at all of the sites along the Great Texas Wildlife Trail. So I'm able to look at that data specifically from the master naturalist, specifically at wildlife trail sites, and see how many of those are SGCNs and look at trends, and they're contributing to that scientific data. So there is a tie there with SGCNs, in addition to just educating the general public about opportunities that are out there. We also have a program called the Great Texas Birding Classic that I run. It's a bird watching tournament. There are many, many SGCNs that our birders see. These are birders that don't necessarily use eBird other times of the year, but they do as a result of the Birding Classic. So we're contributing to that scientific data, again, that we can get on the back end. There's an easy tie to SGCNs, but that tournament does not have a coordinator and doesn't have anyone staffed up in that. It's me doing all of that work along with my other programs. So we could have bigger reach. We could engage with more people. We could get more data entered through citizen science from this program if we were able to staff up with that. We have matching dollars for that because we have sponsorships and registrations. So it's a program that could easily scale up and be really beneficial as part of that program. Since it only happens once a year, that staff person, I would also envision running our Texas Pollinator BioBlitz, which we gather that data in iNaturalist and can be used to connect with SGCNs. We do a report every year on how many SGCNs are identified through the Pollinator BioBlitz. This is regular, everyday, general Texans that we're trying to expose to pollinators and the importance of pollinators in our ecosystems. I've always wanted to scale that project out. We do it in fall to correspond with the monarch migration. I would love to have a summer one that corresponds with Pollinator Week. Our entomologists would love me to have a summer one. But staffing and bandwidth is an issue. RAWA funding would allow us to really grow that program. And so I have dollars associated with these programs to really scale up wildlife viewing. I have other ideas as things grow and we have more match and more money of what we could do going forward. We have a paddling trails program that deals with aquatic and terrestrial SGCNs that people come into contact with. We aren't doing bioblitzes with that program yet, but there are ways that we could tie this to SGCN if we had staffing, again, to increase bandwidth. So those are the wildlife viewing programs. Those are some of the ones that already exist. We aren't looking at creating new things so much yet as just trying to really allow the things that we have to be as good as they can be in ways that we haven't been able to in the past due to lack of funding and lack of staff. On the education side, our Project WILD coordinator is a single person for the entire state of Texas. That is a program that does deal with education in aquatic and terrestrial SGCNs and works with educators and schools. And we would love to see those programs grow. So we've identified what match could be used for that, either through salaries or other program dollars that come in so that we could grow Project WILD in a more meaningful way and be more statewide and reach more youth, more teachers, more schools, and be more fully integrated. And this funding would allow us to do a lot of those things that we haven't. And similarly, we have an Exploring Water and Watersheds Texas Waters program that we've translated into Spanish. We have it in English, but we have half of a person who works on that. So looking at ways that we could really expand this existing really great resource that educates on aquatic SGCNs and terrestrial SGCNs on the water's edge and blowing those programs up to their full potential in ways that we haven't. We run everything on a shoestring with shoestring staff, and RAWA would really transform that. Do we have ideas of other things outside what we're already doing? Yes, but we are looking at what could we start small with, have good successes with, and then grow from there. So that's the strategy that we're looking at here in Texas. There is some awareness campaigns and marketing and other things that would allow us to reach beyond the choir, people who are already engaged with us that we would be really interested in. So we'd be interested in seeing how and if RAWA funds could be used for that as well. Human dimensions work. We don't do survey work because we don't have money to do surveys, but boy, it would be great to really track metrics in a strategic way using human dimensions specialists. So that's something that I'm really interested in as well, but it takes money. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So next time, I think it's now Cynthia and Kristen.
All right, we need to get permission to share our screen, if that's okay, or my screen.
Okay. Hang on one second.
Hello, everybody.
I love how we're all lurking in sunny, we're inside, but it's sunny outside. So we look like we're in a witness protection program. Okay, let me see if this works. Okay.
Maybe it's just Kristen or
Sorry,
am I doing something?
It's working.
Yep, see your screen.
Okay. And we'll go. I only have one monitor. I'm not used to driving with just one monitor, so let me know when it looks like it's in the correct format.
Yeah, you're in this. Yep, you're good.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. It's really great to see everybody on this call, and this series has been super helpful for us that are revising our swaps in the next 2-year time period. So really appreciate it. We're going to focus on the education.
Kristen's screen. Do other people see her screen?
Do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
PowerPoint? Okay, I'm the only one that doesn't see it. Okay.
That's
All right.
not good.
Well, I mean, I see it says RAWA-Ready or not yet, and there's a first slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
the reason it's not good Cynthia doesn't see it is she's doing the second half of this. So we'll see if you can work on that while I talk about these first 6 slides.
Go right ahead. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to focus on some of our engagement actions now that we have already been able to start within our 2015 plan. And it's all based around this goal that we included. It's our 3rd goal within our current state wildlife action plan. And it is to enhance opportunities to enjoy species in greatest conservation need and other wildlife and to participate in conservation. Underneath that broad scale goal, the 2 main objectives that we're really digging in on and starting little seeds with are increasing the number and diversity of people participating in wildlife focused activities and increasing the number and diversity of people directly engaged in conservation of species in greatest conservation need. Oops. Let's see. So I threw this photo in here because this is a little Head Start wood turtle, and these programs are kind of in that Head Start phase where we're in the beginnings of kind of like Shelley said, growing. These are all scalable. We wanted to get them started as soon as possible. And if RAWA comes to fruition, we will be ready to scale these up mightily. So I'm just going to start by some of the things we're doing now, and I'll focus on the first 3 bullets here, which are building our community science program, kicking off a program called Bird by Bird that we were able to start with the help of Idaho, and supporting and increasing diversity in environmental careers, which we call our IDEC internship program, which is actually throughout our whole Department of Natural Resources. And then Cynthia will take over for the conducting social science research and adding a supervisory level non-game wildlife engagement position that's up and coming. So we in 2019 officially hired a wildlife community science coordinator for the non-game program in Minnesota, and decided we're going to grow our own community science work. There are many efforts going on, and we want to not only bolster those existing efforts, but we have some of our own efforts that had fits and starts and didn't quite, either they were stopped by the national level and we had to reinvent them on the state level, or just kind of had some issues because of that capacity and funding problem. We realized that this is probably the best way to get people outdoors and appreciating and engaging with those species of greatest conservation need and contributing to actual science. Not only did we hire that engagement or the community science coordinator, we also have a statistician on staff with our non-game program that can help us design these projects so that they're statistically rigorous and actually produce usable data. So just to kind of say that our citizen science or community science is a way that we can not only engage with the public, they contribute data to us, and we also tout other aspects like eBird and iNaturalist and other things that are kind of off the shelf, ready to use. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're actually here to contribute to that larger scale programming as well. Currently, of course, it's hard to kick off community science right before a pandemic, but we've gotten over that hurdle, and we have launched 7 projects that you can choose from to participate with our DNR non-game program. And we really tout that science is for everyone. So our webpage also highlights community science opportunities that are available right out your back door. Another program that we've launched recently and brought a coordinator on for just within this last year is called Bird by Bird. Cynthia was introduced to this concept at one of the wildlife viewing conferences and connected me with the folks in Idaho that are running this program. Really great idea. We were able to kind of take some of their major concepts and make it to Minnesota, and have decided to emphasize 3 main tenets of the Bird by Bird program. Number 1, birds are kind of the gateway non-game wildlife. They are right out your back door, no matter really where you are. You can be in the cities, you can be in the forest, you can be in the prairie. You're likely to see a bird. And not everybody recognizes that birds are part of their outdoor community. So we're providing 3 different aspects of this. The place-based environmental education learning is actually aimed at our, I believe it's called Tier 1 schools or Type 1 schools, where we have 40% or more that have free or reduced lunch. So really targeting some of the schools that may not have these opportunities otherwise. We're also building outdoor leadership training, focusing on high school or recent graduates that students that might be interested in careers and have no idea on how to get started with those career opportunities. And having those folks actually participate in paid internships where we can reimburse them for their time to learn about different aspects of working in this field. And then they, at the end of the program, get to participate in community engagement where they get to lead a bird walk, something along those lines. So we're really coming full circle around and wanting to engage multiple levels of the community and not just schools. And kind of dovetailing from that and broader than that, we also have within our full agency, we have the IDEC internship program. Our non-game project, or our non-game program has actually hosted, I think, 4 of these folks. And we are able to bring them out in the field, give them hands-on experience, and get a lot of work done with them, helping us out along the way. We have them for about a summer. Super fun, really engaging time for students that are just finishing college and have been able to qualify for this program. They get to spend a year looking at different divisions of the agency, and then they choose which division they'd like to be placed with. And we've been lucky enough to be chosen by multiple interns, and it's a real blast to see them kind of open up and realize that this can not only be a lifelong obsession, but an actual career, which has been really great. So those are just some of the things we're working on currently within our existing SWAP, and we're able to do that because we do have some diversified funding streams. But if we get something like RAWA, we're able to take these programs and really advance them even further. So I'm hoping Cynthia can see this now.
Yeah, I am going to follow along on my own version of it. I cannot see it, which is very strange, but
Yeah, that is weird. Just tell me when to advance.
Yeah, so like that. I'll snap my fingers. Okay. So I just was going to add on the interns. I'm kind of pleased to be able to say that I think we've had 5 different students, but of that 5, 2 of them we've kept on for, a good 9 to 12 months after their internship with, we call it kind of an emergency hire or something. We can't keep them on any longer than a year, but we've been able to keep them on even after their internship, which I think gave them a really nice boost in their careers. So, and that all dovetails into their school, where they are with schooling, but that was nice for all of us. So, okay, I think you're looking at the picture of the Minnesota State Fair. The point here is that in Minnesota, as Kristen ended by saying, we have a variety of different funding mechanisms. We're lucky. We're really lucky. We have our biggest thing that we have in Minnesota that makes us be able to do a lot of this different work is that we have on the state income tax return, there is a loon line where a taxpayer can choose to donate to the non-game wildlife program. We are the only special thing on the form. The loon line is the only thing there. We get about $1.5 million a year from those donations from the tax revenue, and also checks or e-pay that are donated to us, not necessarily through the taxes, but the donations that we get. So that gives us a good like $1.5 million a year. And then our critical habitat license plates funding matches that. So we end up with, you can do the math there. So that makes it about 3 million there. And then we have the SWIG dollars on top of that. We also, some of the work that I'm going to show you real quickly is funded. We additionally have funding from our environmental trust fund, state lottery money. That's a competitive process to get that funding. So we do have money to work with, and we're really lucky. The point though here with like this slide and some of the questions is that we don't want to take all that for granted. All of that donation, buying license plates, that is because Minnesotans kind of believe in our mission of conservation and biodiversity. And they self-identify as environmentalists. and they're willing to step up to the plate for us. But we really don't know very much about the people that donate to us or that buy the critical habitat license plates. So my motive, my passion here has been to figure out more about this. Do you want to go ahead, Kristen, and advance, please? Okay, this is a little awkward. I think I know where we are. So, you know, my little tongue-in-cheek kind of saying here is hope is, it's been really great for Minnesota. We've been really strong financially, but hope is not a strategy in keeping it strong. We need data. So I've really been committed over 5 years or so here to collect some social science to help us understand what Minnesotans want from the non-game program, from wildlife diversity, and to you know, help us grow the program and keep it strong. So we worked with we worked with Virginia Tech, Ashley Dare's lab, to do this work. Go ahead, Kristen, you can advance that. And I'll say right off that the full contract that we've done that'll be going on 3.5 years with supporting a graduate student has cost us about $145,000. We've paid for that with a variety of different sources. We had some SWIG funding went for that, but the non-game dollars, the donations that I mentioned, the habitat license plate match, and then also the lottery money all helped pay for it. The majority of the funds were the state funds that I last mentioned. The 3 parts of the research were, first of all, well, let me say this first. This work will be wrapping up in the fall with results being produced and all. We have done a few presentations. We've shared out pieces of this where the analysis and writing and all has been done, but it's all still sort of in flux. We actually have the graduate student in Minnesota right now testing messaging around the non-game program, like what people, you know, what can you say to people to engage them? They're actually out at parks interviewing people with clipboards or iPads, I guess. Clipboards are definitely right. So that's going on right now. So it'll be kind of wrapping up at the end of the summer, and then we'll have more data and reports coming out that we can share with people. But I want to, and then the last thing that'll happen in August is we're having a report out to Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC organizations that participated in our focus groups. So we're having a big kind of dinner party sharing that out this summer as well. So I'm going to go through these 3 phases just with one comment for each one. So the first phase was getting our Minnesota data on wildlife viewing. Other states have done this as well. But what really surprised me with this set of data here is that I learned that we should really be focusing on novices, people who are new to engaging with wildlife, people who maybe don't go way up north for a week or whatever, but people who are interested but really don't know how to get started and don't really know where to go. Those are the people that we should be targeting for wildlife viewing. The second phase was really digging deeper into a whole bunch of data on the people that do support us, the Minnesotans that donate money to us or volunteer for us, that watch our Eagle Cam and do other things. Who are those people? How are they the same or different from other people in Minnesota who support the environment, but they're not engaged with us in any way? So it's looking at those 2 groups of people, collecting data, and then comparing the 2 groups so that we can build a stronger community of supporters. And that message testing that I mentioned is part of this phase 2. So one of the things that we learned in this phase 2 that sort of surprised me is that people are really strongly in support of our mission of conservation. They understand wildlife diversity, biodiversity, they understand that, and they really are there going to show up to support that. And they also think we're doing a good job, but they have no idea who we are. So you're doing really well, but we don't, who are you? You know, it's like they don't know who we are. They don't connect us to a person really. They don't even, like, if they were going to go to the website, I don't think they're necessarily even sure where they would go. So we really have an identity problem, but people are supportive of this idea of wildlife and helping wildlife. So that was what we learned. That was one of my big learning points there. And then the third one, we were trying to reach the, ties into the relevancy well, but BIPOC Minnesotans, we specifically asked questions about community science. We did this phase through with focus groups. Focus groups of first leaders of BIPOC organizations doing outdoor activities, and then also the participants, so leaders and participants of BIPOC organizations. And the thing that I learned from the focus groups at this point anyway, still waiting on some of the data, but is that our opportunity in this area to engage BIPOC Minnesotans is going to be hindered by the fact that our staff is predominantly white and not BIPOC. So until we can kind of address that barrier and kind of show up and invite people with having representation, we're going to be struggling. So those are the things I learned. Go ahead, Kristen. Okay, you should be looking at I just like this slide because it's kind of fun to look at. But these are the BIPOC organizations that we attempted to plug in with. We ended up working with about nine. We identified like 20 groups and ended up working with about 9. And this was for our focus groups I mentioned, that I referred to. Go ahead, Kristen. Okay, thanks. So just one little bit of data here that I think is interesting. This is on, we looked at demographics with interest in community science, and this is a statistically significant difference. But I thought this is an opportunity here presented to us, and that the BIPOC respondents to our surveys and focus groups were actually more interested in community science, collecting data with us and all than others. So that presents to me like an opportunity that we should be pursuing. I just thought that was interesting and wanted to share. I just have one more slide. Okay, so just kind of wrapping this up with relevancy and swaps. So we have pretty heavily invested in the social science research and also the new programming, some of the work that Kristen, the programs Kristen mentioned a minute ago. So, we're doing our best to be informed. We're also being pretty brave to jump into some things and take a risk and try to do things different. I think we're really headed in the right direction with our wildlife viewing, wildlife viewing. We're going to get that going. The bird by bird, the community science. We're taking some big steps there, trying some things that we haven't done before. We really think we're headed in the right direction, and I think we're going to do well to serve both our human population as well as our wildlife diversity. I think that winning people over will take us really far in preserving biodiversity in the state. And it is all of these reasons together why we are making the commitment to add a supervisor level position to our staff. It's the non-game wildlife engagement supervisor who will be a leader of all these different things that we've kind of mentioned here today. So that's it.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Kristen. Appreciate that. Hey, Jess, you're up next.
Hi, hello. Okay, before I start, I want to let everyone know that I have multiple screens going on, and I want to also make sure that you can also see my screen.
Yep. That's great.
Okay, perfect. And I can be heard and all that good stuff. Okay, awesome. So hello, my name is Jess Brooks. I work with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. I work with Jen Newmark, who's also on the call. Hi, Jen. And I am one of the 2 wildlife diversity staff specialists. I will go through my position just a little bit. And also before I get started, I wanted to showcase what our new SWAP cover page looks like. So that's what we're looking at here. So our new 2022 SWAP is connecting with our citizens through conservation education. And throughout the entire presentation, I'll also showcase pictures from the SWAP and a lot of them were taken by our staff and our volunteers as well. So, so we understood and understand the importance of public buy-in and community support for conservation through our state agency. So we decided to make the relationship between the two more distinct and more prominent this go around. We connected conservation of SGCN and their habitats through citizen science education and wildlife viewing as a direct link. That also allowed our teams to set goals, objectives, and strategies in the long term. This also meant that we could also mark our accomplishments along the way. And the picture that we're looking at is the last chapter of our 2022 SWAP, which is chapter 7. And we wanted to incorporate a chapter specifically on this for conservation education to give that division and that effort a stronger seat at the table and a stronger voice. As far as building relevancy goes, as we know, and as we've seen through all of the latest surveys, there are so many numerous studies that show how important connections to nature are for human health, as well as increasing support for interest in conservation in general. So to address the needs of Nevada's growing and diverse populations and wildlife resources, we plan to take several education and outreach approaches to streamline our efforts. And throughout the SWAP, in every single chapter, there are 7 chapters, we've described each of those. The process, though, for developing this within our agency, we had key players within our conservation education division work with the wildlife diversity division staff to develop these new approaches. I think it's important to mention here too that no one really stopped doing what they were already doing. This effort was just added to our already huge, robust, awesome programs. Overall, we wanted to become more efficient and more relevant and connect with our citizens more. So in our 2022 SWAP, we've stated and described and planned to expand wildlife education programming for both classroom and public audiences. We plan to create a statewide wildlife viewing program to connect people to all of the wonderful wild areas that we have in Nevada and where they can experience nature and contribute to community science. And then finally, that third bullet point is to implement a multimedia outreach approach to inform the public about our sensitive species and all of our SGCN. Also, when we were setting conservation objectives, when we were creating the new SWAP or revamping the new SWAP, we made sure that each of the 5 categories of barriers that were mentioned in AWWA's 2019 relevancy roadmap can be addressed in some way, somewhere within the SWAP. In particular, the wildlife education programming outreach efforts and developing new nature tourism opportunities really hit hard. So we really made an effort to address all of those. As far as setting conservation objectives, our aim overall is to connect people with their natural resources and promote conservation on a broader scale and really work with those beginner naturalists. We recognize that with the resources we do have, along with conservation of SGCN and their habitats, all of these things offer unique opportunities for citizen science opportunities, storytelling, and getting people outside learning about these resources. Our 4 main categories for all of our overall objectives in connecting with our citizens are listed on the screen here. They are K through 12 wildlife education programs, building and maintaining interpretive centers that provide wildlife education programming, urban wildlife and living with wildlife programs, and wildlife viewing and nature tourism. We also have 2 new positions. I believe some of you have met one of them. His name is Bobby Jones. He is our outdoor education coordinator. To go along with that, we also have an outdoor connection plan. And the second new position, sort of new, kind of new, is my position as the wildlife diversity staff specialist. There is another one of me. He is across this wall that you guys can't see. But Jen, my coworker, has often referred to me as a partner staff specialist. So I'm really excited to get to know all of you a little bit more, and then also our partners within our state. In addition to these new positions, we also have a new 5-year strategic plan that also supports connecting citizens to wildlife and to the agency. We do have some key strategies that are listed directly in the SWOP. It is a lot of words, so I didn't want to list them all here, but I'll talk about them now very, very briefly. So we identified education and outreach objectives that directly tie to the habitat threats and conservation to sensitive species. All of these strategies that I'm going to list and briefly talk about connect to all 4 of those objectives that I just spoke to and are laid out in the plan throughout the entire thing. These also focus on ways to use citizen science, education, and wildlife viewing to help enhance conservation and connect our agency with the public. And some are already well in progress. So there are a lot. Here we go. So one is habitat loss and destruction education to the public, climate change education, aquatic invasive species education, which has been a part of our efforts previously, but we're just putting more effort to that. Sensitive species education, a big one is K-12 wildlife education programs. And in the K-12 wildlife education program directive, there are so many very well established programs that teachers can sign up for. They are, a lot of them are directly involved with or without some of our staff, like a go as your own pace sort of situation. It really depends on what the teachers are aimed to do. Some of our others are develop interpretive centers. I have very briefly talked about that already, that have public wildlife education programs throughout the year, seasonal, day, evening, provide outreach and public wildlife education in all of our locations, even with some of our partnering areas like parks, WMAs, local areas in town. We also want to develop and provide wildlife viewing and nature tourism information. Specifically, we have a new program that I'm working on with Bobby and another one of our staff members called the Nevada Wildlife Discovery Trail. It's super new in development, and I won't share too much on it right now, but we're looking to start implementing some of those things before the end of the year. And then the last one is develop and provide watchable wildlife programs, which is part of the Wildlife Discovery Trail. Most of these are pretty new, but we have some of them already kicking and rolling. And progress, this is just one big slide, but I very quickly wanted to just note that we've been working on the 2022 SWOP for a few years now. And since it's done, it's not available to the public yet unless something recently has changed. And I know, Jen, you're on, so if that's wrong, please correct me. But we've learned that progress is a thing and change is a thing, and that we're all in it together. It definitely feels like the entire agency understands the importance of connecting with our citizens and having that relationship with the public and partners. And now that our SWOP is completed, it definitely also feels like that we are very ambitious, but we're also very determined. And when the SWOP is available, when our new SWOP is available to the public, I'll make sure to have it accessible to everybody. But that's all I had. And I know I'm the last speaker, I believe. So I wanted to open it up to any questions, but I also wanted to pass it back.
Yeah, so Jess, so if you could just stop your screen sharing, we're running a little bit over time, and I did want to spend some time on our panel discussion. So I'm going to ask folks if you had questions for the speakers, if you could just pop those in the chat, and then we'll ask the speakers to reply in chat, or we'll get replies afterwards. But I did want to get to a couple of questions we had. So if the speakers could just, if possible, just turn your screens video back on. And I was going to pose just a couple of questions, and feel free, those of you that are listening to weigh in as well, either through the chat or use the raise your hand function. But what are the pros and cons of addressing plants, conservation, education, recreation, and maybe even law enforcement in your plan? What are some of the downsides, and what are some of the pluses of doing that? Any of the speakers want to take a shot at that? Either pros or cons or both. Kristen?
I'll jump in by saying, if you consider the scalability of the work that we already do, there are no cons. We really are in a position to conceptualize or have a vision for how these things can be integrated into our work, and kind of the charge for species of greatest conservation need, conservation efforts, and education, outreach, even law enforcement, all pertain to that in some way or another. Having it in your plan, even if you don't quite know the funding resource or capacity to get it done, allows you to partner with those that might be able to carry that for you. So I can't think of many cons other than it just is really a bigger lift than we've already been doing, and we're getting stronger. That's what we're doing.
Great. Thank you for that, Kristen. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Sure, Mark, I'll just add that I guess from our perspective in Whisper, we recognize the value of, in particular, the education and recreation types of projects. So, I mentioned earlier that we have some interim guidance, but we're holding off on sharing that for the time being until we have more assurance of what the final language in the law will look like. But I don't think that should discourage anyone from moving ahead with any type of identifying SGCN related or T&E related projects that involve recreation and education. I think it's pretty clear from our conversations with our solicitor that anything that is consistent, again, with that statement of purpose in the 23 Senate bill is going to be eligible for funding under RAWA. So if you're thinking about a more complicated sort of multi-use facility, like you mentioned, Mark, where it's a deer stand that may potentially be used for SGCN viewing outside of certain periods of the year. I don't know if that should be top of your list. I think those that are clearly for SGCN recreation and education related purposes, yes, go ahead with those. Start identifying those now if you have the capacity and interest in doing that.
Great, thanks, Paul. Anyone else? Pros and cons? Okay. And I would just add, the original vision for state wildlife action plans is that they were bigger than just any single funding source. So, the extent that you can use other dollars that are specifically for wildlife viewing, and you can include that in your plan as a way of prioritizing the work that needs to be done in your state. But so I don't really know that there's a con or a downside of including conservation education or wildlife recreation in your plans, because you can always just focus, the work that you want to do on specific funding sources if you need to. So then the second question was, this is sort of more of an open question, but I'll start with the panelists. What are the resources that are out there other than, we have Jess's great plan now as a template you might want to use, but what are the resources? What resources do you know, are needed to help make your swap RAWA ready? What resources are needed? Or what resources are available that we might want to just highlight that can help you make your swap RAWA ready?
Hey, Mark, I do have a quick question.
Mhm.
I was curious, I know there's the USGS list of states that have pollinators, but is there an updated list that contains information on what states have plants or are considering adding them? And the same for pollinators, just to help, like when I'm having conversations internally, I can kind of tell people within my agency, you know, this is why we're considering it. A lot of these other states are doing it, so it's something that we're interested in.
Yeah, there is a list, a spreadsheet that has the list of states that have it was a survey of states that are either have plants in their plans or are planning to put their plants in their plans.
And I'll add, Mark, I have an updated list that is current through this month. And it does show 23 states that are, as we've analyzed it, currently are compliant with the language in RAWA on the plant supplement. We have one more state that is pending right now with a minor revision. So we're looking at 24, and I can share that with the group.
Yeah, that'd be great
Okay.
to do that, Paul.
Sure.
That'd be great.
On the pollinators, I know Ross Winton in Texas is working on some resources with the invertebrate and pollinator work group, AFWA's invertebrate pollinator work group, on some resources for states as they revise their state wildlife action plans. And so that might be a nice request to Ross to have a list of, you're looking for a list of pollinators from other states that are already SGCN?
Just a list of the number of states that have included pollinators in a helpful capacity, just so I can be like, we're considering doing this. 40 states have done it already, kind of that general summary information.
Okay, yeah, so maybe, I mean, you've got the SGCN database at USGS, that's one source, but maybe, you know, maybe the work group could come up with a list of those action plans that they really feel, you know, had a fair treatment of pollinators in their plans.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Resources, anybody else that in the audience today want to either request a resource or identify a resource that can help your colleagues make their swap RAWA ready? Okay, so we'll kind of operate under the assumption that there's no new resources that are needed, but as we identify resources, we'll certainly share them with this group. Any parting comments by any of the panelists?
I can add, I didn't really talk about funding sources too much, but I do think about them a lot since wildlife viewing hasn't really been eligible for SWIG funding. A lot of my programs aren't being used for match for any grants right now. They are new funds that are state funds that haven't been used for match. But I've also been trying to line up little lines of income where I can. The wildlife viewer survey that I think Cynthia may have referenced talked about, one of the questions we asked is how people like to support conservation through actions or funding. And we were only questioning wildlife viewers. And there were a lot of ways that people do like to spend money, voluntary and involuntary. By voluntary, I mean like buying a conservation license plate or a lottery ticket, or, you know, making a donation. And then the involuntary, I mean, buying a hunting or fishing license or a duck stamp or things like that. And through that, we're working on a community of practice to look at some case studies in states. We have 15 states doing projects this year, and some of them as part of a multi-state grant. Some of them are doing a funding thing, but these could be buckets of funds. So when you're trying to figure out, well, how do I find match? How do I find things that can be used to leverage in a matching grant program? My salary almost entirely is nature tourism and wildlife viewing. So outdoor recreation is what I do. Volunteer hours, if they're not being used for another federal grant, might be a source of funding. I have a new conservation license plate. I'm hoping that that could be used as a source of funding. It's a nature tour. That's what the funds are dedicated for. And that was launched a year ago. So they're just pockets of money. So thinking, you know, this legislation hasn't passed yet. So be thinking about ways that you can be creating funding streams that can go as match for education or outdoor recreation, so that you can hit the ground running and you do have a way to tap in and provide your match.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Shelley. And thanks, Jeff and Paul and Kristen and Jess and Cynthia for speaking today and for presenting your ideas. And hope this was helpful to everyone. And let's keep the conversation going in terms of how, you know, what are the best examples out there of, and what are the ideas about incorporating education and recreation into state wildlife action plans. So always feel free to reach out to me if you have something you want to share with the group. I'm happy to do that. And let us know, let Jason and I know if we can make these learning series better. We love critical feedback because we want these to serve this group that's working so diligently on revising state wildlife action plans. So just let us know if there's something we can do different or better, and we will do that. So thanks everybody. And so we'll send the recording around in the next agenda for the next learning series in July. We're not planning to do a learning series in August, going to take that month off for all of you. Many of you will be on vacation. So we'll have one more before the end of the summer next month. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks all.